Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about the Serial podcast. After 10 years of doing podcasts, Serial was announced as being the new podcast, the thing that made podcasting interesting and sexy, why millions of people were listening to this podcast, what have you. And the first season was very interesting. It was very well formatted, came out on a regular basis, ticked all the basic boxes associated with ideally what podcasts should be. The second season was more interesting. They picked a political topic associated with the fellow who ended up being captured by the Taliban because he wandered off his base. Wide variety of bits and pieces came out through the podcast. I'm not going to talk too heavily to that. I just want to talk about the format and also various structural changes that they made. Because a lot of the story was evolving in real time, they decided to move from the weekly format to the every 2-week format, and they said that was because they were getting a lot more content. But actually, it feels more like the podcast ended prematurely. There was no real resolution. There wasn't any real planning that went through it. And a lot of the qualities, it's not NPR, but it's a similar organization that's loosely connected with NPR. You know, the people that were putting out the podcast on a regular basis had amazing resources at their disposal, quite unlike those of us that do independent podcasts. And I really think the whole thing fell flat on its face. The surveying that I did associated with Serial listeners, majority of the folk that I knew that listened to it stopped listening after the first season. They weren't really interested in the second season. Although the second season was interesting, for me, personally at least, I think there's a kind of jaded view with, like, everyday Americans associated with the war in Afghanistan in particular. And anything that dredges that up, that provides illustrative, descriptions associated with how it's just a complete fool's errand, didn't really seem to have the same kind of audience interest that the original case had. And curiously, in parallel, the original case was reheard by a judge associated with whether it would go into appeals. And not even that part. I mean, they started running with that as a kind of incidental, occasional podcast, but they never really followed up with that either. So it has a kind of curious emotion now where it's all kind of muddied, and a lot of the original listenership, or at least those that I surveyed, didn't even listen to the second season. And I wonder actually whether this does more damage for podcasting than it does positive for podcasting. And I haven't seen any follow-up articles that actually talk about this. Serial was very good in the first season, and I don't particularly like using those terms associated with episodic content. But anyway, in the first year, it was very good associated with getting positive media, which kind of pumped it up, and, all boats rise associated with podcasting as far as I'm concerned. So if there's positive media, so much the better. But the second season was almost a satire of what a lot of podcasting has become, associated with folks starting out. Everything's very positive initially. Then it actually gets hard. You have to produce stuff. You have to do it on a semi-regular basis. Life gets in the way. A variety of things get in the way. And what I found particularly curious about Serial was it was almost a satire of podcasting problems. And I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming there's going to be a season 3, but I'm not really sure what they're actually going to do associated with the format issues. They went to a 2-week because things were getting more interesting and difficult, and they were going to put out a lot more information. And then probably about 3 or 4 shows into that 2-week format just ended. They should have recorded weekly and at least doubled the amount of content before the end. All very curious, all very, this doesn't really bode well for podcasting as a form, particularly in the media. I just wanted to add this review in terms of the fact that I think independent folk that are doing this on a regular basis probably need to find their own, means of publicity. And whenever you have organizations that are, getting behind podcasting, in particular now there's discussion associated with monetization and radio folk and all this other related nonsense. I don't know. It's good to be independent. It's good to be putting out audio. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.